Welcome to the Woman Who Rubs the Mountain podcast, a gathering place for conversations and stories of ecological embodiment. I am your host and guide, Kendra Ward. So our explorations begin with this single question. What happens when we rub on the body of the earth? How does it brush back against us? So here we seek an intimacy, a love affair with the land and beings where we live. Let us come together in creative, strange, disruptive ways of relating beyond the human-centric limitations of our current dreaming. By sharing experiences of embodied ecology, our reality shifts, our core truths sharpen, and space is made for a new old earth-honoring culture to reemerge. And you, dear listener, can join me in this animist celebration. Come share your explorations of earth-honoring revelry in spoken or written word to the story cauldron. Listen to the end or go to kendraward.com to get all of the details. So I am so very honored to be in conversation today with the medicine woman of Providence, Rhode Island, Erica Nunnally. Erica is truly a woman of many, many gifts. She is an author, and I will leave links to her creations in the show notes page. She is also a master yoga teacher, a master Reiki teacher. She is the founder of the Deep River School of Yoga. I love the name of that. But what really drew me to her work is her work as a traditional animist and ritualist, an intuitive healer and ancestral guide. As a keeper of both universal and ancestral medicines, Erica describes her Dharma as holding the space between for folks who are ready to reconnect to their highest self. Erica teaches and leads workshops and retreats nationally and internationally, online and in person. And to check out her offerings, please go to her website, ericanunnally.com. So good to share this space with you, Erica. Thanks for being here with me.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So just in the spirit of grounding, I am wondering about the place where you are, the place where you live, and I'm wondering about the new old names of this place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am seated here actually on the lands of the Narragansett. It's Providence, Rhode Island. And, surrounded by the rivers and on the coast of the ocean. It's just truly remarkable land. Yeah, and I'm just honored to be able to be here and hold this space for the spirits that are here.
Beautiful. Well, tell me a little bit more, just tuning in and feeling into that a little bit more from an embodied sense. I'm wondering if there are any ways in particular that how you create an embodied connection there and how you feel into sort of this sense of inner ecosystem reflective of outer ecosystem and vice versa, sort of the intertangling of that.
Mhm. Actually, it's really interesting. I think when we first moved here, so just to back up a little bit, my family was actually living in Massachusetts, the land of Massasoit and many others, and slowly started making our way south for several years and then landed here in Providence. And honestly, when I first landed here in the city, right, I was actually having a bit of trouble connecting to the lands and the waters. And so I was, turning on the faucet and speaking to the water coming out of that into the reservoirs that feed it, because I was just like, I don't know, I'm in a city, even though it's really small. But when 2020 came along and everything had to slow down, my family and I had a lot of time to get out and hike and learn a little bit more about the natural spaces that are here that are sort of untouched, and natural waterfalls to the south and the winding paths in the north, and just these small little nooks and crannies that seem to follow the flow of the rivers. And so it was just actually a tiny little blessing in the spark of everything that was going on to help me reconnect and recenter with the lands here. So it's kind of a new relationship.
That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Going deeper with
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, having the ocean there is I'm I used to live an hour from the ocean and now I live 3 to 4 hours and it's
Mm.
um yeah, that's big medicine there. That great mama
Yeah.
ocean
Yeah,
for
for sure.
sure. Well,
One of the things,
yeah,
one of
go
the
ahead.
things that we actually did during these past 2 years is we were able to go camping a lot more often. And so we started moving again a little further south and just following the coast of the ocean. And we landed in Virginia, where my ancestors are predominantly from, and spending time with the ocean there and sort of hearing its stories in relation to the ocean up here. And, there's similarities, but there are differences when you really sit and listen. Um, and I think that was a wonderful anchoring for me in particular, like being able to experience the shift in tone and voice of the ocean as you move further south. So just
Mhm.
throwing that in there.
Yeah, that is really, really true. Like how
Mhm,
each spot along the ocean is entirely different.
mhm,
Yeah. Hmm. Well, yeah, just you mention on your website, you describe
mhm.
how you've always felt drawn to animism and
Yes.
to earth-based medicines.
Mhm,
But also this sense, you use this word rootlessness, and you use it in the context of not having any exposure to the medicine people of your ancestral lineages who might
mhm.
have taught you their ways. And so just feeling into how this is true for many of us, and I'm wondering if you might just speak to this rootlessness a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, I believe the rootlessness was almost times two. So just being a person of African descent here in the Americas, right? We have that story of crossing the ocean, crossing the waters, but also my ancestors were already here as well. But there was a huge, of course, as we know, a lot of displacement and disruption there. So that's just ancestrally speaking, having this loss of land and loss of connection and loss of stories. But also in my immediate family, my father was in the military. So we moved every 4 years. So, even though I was born in California, right, this is the land that I was born on, 2 months after I was born, we moved to Japan. And so I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my life there, and Japanese was actually my first language, but I was not of there, right? Then we moved again. We ended up in the Philippines, and another 4 or 5 years goes by, and we finally make our way back to the U.S. And it felt foreign to me because we landed in Wyoming. And this was very, very different than, of course, the lands of being in tropical spaces and always connected to mountains and, going to school in shorts 365 days, that kind of thing. So it was a tremendous shock to my system. And what my father and my mother were able to do is to help us anchor within each other. And so
Mm,
our family unit became roots. And when we landed here, I started to actually, because it was so foreign, I started to sink into listening to the plains because they were so different than the tropical mountains and jungles that I had been in. And I was like, wow, it's not just, I'm in a different place and, I've lost my friends, but the land here spoke differently to me.
mm.
Um, I recognized at a very young age that, Snow and I were not going to be friends. But, the plains and the tall grasses, and we even had buffalo literally roaming in our backyard at the time. Um, those I could speak with and resonate with, right? So, anyway, eventually we finally land in Washington State. And there's a bit of a familiarity there because there are these wonderfully tall mountains, which sort of remind me of Japan, but of course, still not necessarily the tropics, right? And while we were hiking, this is probably when it happened, that stones started to speak to me. And one of the stones that I keep actually in my medicine bundle is a stone that I've had since I was 12 years old. So here, 30 some odd years later, it's still with me. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but it was part of my anchoring. It was part of reminding me that the earth, even though I might be more of a tumbleweed on the earth has all of these wonderful connections underneath. And if I stop and I listen, then I can see how they're actually connected. So at a very young age, I used to leave my house when I would feel unrooted and follow trails through the backyards, over mountain, over fences and all of these things that you're not supposed to do, but I did anyway, to cross this creek, land in the center. And I sat on this flat rock, and that's where I would listen to the trees. And when I could hear them singing again, then I knew that I was connected, not just to like the trees, but to myself and to all of the spaces that I had touched before I landed there. And so it helped to anchor me back all the way back to, the Philippines and Japan, and even the spaces that I don't remember in California. I could sink down enough and hear the songs, and they all kind of came together from all around the world. So being rootless, it was a literal experience for me. But being able to find connection in the natural world is how I was able to anchor. And this is what I try to bring to the clients that I work with.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I just have this image of you, like your mycelial networks are just all around the globe. I mean, not too many people have that experience of having interacted with so many different ecosystems and but feeling it deep, running deep within the earth.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, my
So,
parents were really good at reminding me that, home is not necessarily, and I think it's because of sort of that ancestral wounding of always moving, but they were like, home is where you hang your hat and home is where your family's at, right? So on the surface, that was always enough. And then when I needed to truly like find my roots, I could listen to the broader ecosystem. So good balance.
yeah, yeah. Well, you also practice what you call the four medicines approach,
Yes.
and it feels like that. Just maybe telling us a little bit more about that. And to me, it feels like it's revolutionary and also not at the same time. So
Yeah. Precisely.
yeah, yeah.
It's so funny because, there was a time, I mean, I guess it still sort of exists now where, what I do and how I show up in the world is considered or was considered alternative, right? But really for me, it's a remembering of, returning back to actually our more ancestral and native ways of communicating and being with each other and this earth, right? Like it's actually the old way. It's the
Right.
original way of being. But so my role, I realized, is to provide and reintroduce people, reconnect them back to these four medicines. So mind, body, spirit, and nature. And in my own personal journey, I spent probably, 20 to 25 years of my adult life focused primarily on mind, body, and spirit. This was how I was getting my connection. And I was like, okay, but for some reason, I was still not well, like I had terrible digestive disorders that literally would put me in the hospital for weeks or months at a time. And that was a struggle, not being able to actually take in nourishment, right? Because your digestive system is so out of whack. And I think a lot of people can actually resonate with that. But what I realized, I don't know, it just sort of came on like a light switch one day, that if you imagine for a moment a stool, and let's say it's a three-legged stool, and like we kind of like three-legged stools because no matter where you put them on the earth, they'll be kind of level, like you can sit on it and be stable to a degree. And that's a wonderful thing. But the reality is that you don't know with that. It's kind of like doing the mind, body, spirit. If something's still wrong, you can't actually tell which leg is either wobbly, too short, or is it just the ground that you're on that is unlevel? You're not really sure. But if you put that fourth leg back on, then it's very, very obvious, right? You can see that the table or the chair is going to wobble if something is not exactly balanced for you. So you'll be able to see whether or not it's something in the mind area or something in the body area or something in the spirit, right? And for me, it turned out what was missing was nature, right? So that connection back to nature, even though I could sit and meditate or commune with the world around me, nature is actually a little bit larger than that, at least in the four medicine ways. Nature has to do with literally where we are seated on this planet. So sometimes I feel like the planet is like, you're not actually supposed to be here on the West Coast. you're going to actually be better suited on the East Coast, and then suddenly your systems start to re-regulate, and the way the sun comes up on that coast is going to work better for you, whatever it is, because we are part of this larger ecosystem. We're not, sitting on top of it. We're literally part of it. And so we have to kind of see ourselves in that way. So where we are, like in the world, but also where we are in terms of the types of communities that we gather around us. So maybe we're not necessarily seated in the right community, that it's not necessarily in alignment with where we are or where we're going. And so this, of course, will feed into the stress as opposed to allowing you to lean back in for that nurturing that a community should provide. So it's kind of all those things. Nature is also, of course, the foods that we eat, right? And I don't know how many of us were meant to eat, I can't even come up with a name right now, but let me do like a little side example. If you look at the back of a loaf of bread, and if the ingredients are, 20 ingredients long, then your body probably wasn't ready to process all those 20 ingredients. But if it's just wheat, flour, water, and some salt, your body is already aligned to process those things. So looking at nature in this big, huge, broad way is part of the four medicines, and it's what I try to bring to my clients.
Yeah. Once again, so it's right there all the time. But I also had a similar experience in life where you're like, something's missing in my practices, or just in my community and what I'm drawn to, and then it at the same time, though, in my experience, it was 20 years in a Buddhist practice, and now I'm like, it's not throwing it out and being like, oh, it doesn't exist there. I'm finding ways in which it's interweaving amongst, together, that there's so much overlap. So it's not like one or the other, but all together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So I'm curious, what I'm noticing a lot is ways in which we, like in the collective, there are ideas around going into nature to calm our nervous system or lower blood pressure, or sort of this sense of like detoxing from
Right.
our everyday life. I just saw this ad yesterday for someone having an online program meant to marketed towards mental clarity and brain fog, and the sense of going into nature for brain health.
Yes.
So just, to me, it feels like, yes, there is this sense of being our most loving and available self when we are in the living world. But there's, even with this sense, there's this sense of separateness, like that nature's outside of us. So it's this nuance, this wanting to feel connected, but oftentimes the approach is based in the sense of taking or consuming still. So hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. It is a really unusual, or it's a tricky path, I suppose, to navigate, because in one way, on one hand, I do believe that we have to speak to the people in the way that they're going to understand it
Mm-hmm.
and be willing to go ahead and spend time in nature. And so if there are audiences that need to hear the science behind it, right, to bring them out into the natural world, if when they get there, they actually discover something deeper and they actually discover the connection, then I feel like everyone's winning, right? But if we are promoting sort of, as you mentioned, going out and sort of taking what we can get from the world around us even more, then we're all losing. So I think the more of us who are out there encouraging the people that we know and work with and love to be in nature in a way that is reciprocal, that when you're out there, give of yourself, give of your energy, literally hug a tree sometimes. It's actually, they do appreciate it. Rather than carving your name into it and branding it. Be gentle with it, share your stories. And I think however we cross that threshold into spending more time with nature, if that ends up being the outcome that you actually find a relationship with it, I'm all for it, for sure. But yeah, it is hard because we don't want to have it become sort of suddenly there are fences up around that this is the space where you go to get the most quiet. And now you've got to pay $80 to spend time in here.
Yeah.
Commercialism, capitalism, all of that can really, kind of get in the way of the whole point, right? Of
Yeah.
that relationship building. So.
Yeah, I'm finding even in just that little tweak in perspective, like calling it to the surface and watching the way, like our any tendency in doing that, and we can still have this sense of like, oh, no wonder I'm drawn to this place, but just that little sense of like, oh, and I can still catch the ways in which my training might be in sort of like consuming this for myself somehow. It's just like that little shift. Yeah.
For sure. For sure. It's like, braiding sweetgrass. I'm sure your audience has heard of that book or read it. And I love how the author provides that both sides of, she's able to speak really clearly to both perspectives, right? So the strawberry is there, it's beautiful. And when the rabbit eats it, it poops out the seeds and more strawberries come later, right? That kind of thing. These strawberries are a gift to be eaten so that they can be released back and more grow, versus the strawberries being picked and perfected in quotes and sold by, the basket. And then the seeds never actually make it back to the earth because instead we use the restrooms that our plumbing provides wonderful benefits. I'm not going to go there, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah,
we kind of lose the whole cycle in that. And so, but anyway, she speaks to it so lovely. And so if any of your audience hasn't read it, I highly recommend it. Braiding Sweetgrass. So
yeah, I'll put that in the resources. It's just an essential text, and also just something to take your time with as well. I feel like every chapter is its own little contemplation. Yeah. Well, one question that's sort of been lingering with me a bit lately is the sense of the wellness industry, and even this word wellness. Like my old clinic long ago was called Whole Family Wellness Center, and even now I'm like, oh, like the naming. It's like that. It's just interesting, but just tuning into how sort of the industry of it promotes the sense of health tied to the individual, especially kind of this individual self-improvement project of sorts, instead of being community-based or viewing health as sort of an emergent phenomenon that's reflective of our overall culture. So just tuning into your sense of like the strengths and challenges of a one-on-one based model, of which I've probably spent most of my my work life in. And, you know, these are the things that I feel like in my original training as an acupuncturist, there are certain key places where I feel like, you know, there's just this void, like there's this empty space that was never talked about, or so yeah, just kind of tuning into that question a bit.
For sure. So sort of the one-on-one versus sort of community centered wellness or health. And I think I'm going to step back a little bit. And one of the things that I like to remind my clients is that their natural state of being is actually one of wellness. That it's what we do, how we interact, what we're eating, basically how we're living, and the choices that we're making that pull us out of that state of balance and oneness with the world around us. So what we're doing, how we're being, how we're living, and who we're with, the choices that we make are the things that pull us out of balance with that oneness around us, right? And so when you pause for a moment, you realize, oh my gosh, I actually do have a choice in how I treat this body that I've been gifted. I think that reclamation of power is, or agency is important. Our medical systems, and I'm grateful for them, truly, they have saved my life and my daughter's life a few times here, and that's not an exaggeration. But our Western medicine is one to cut apart and dissect, to pull things apart, right? And fix a thing versus looking at a whole thing. And I think we've given we've given control over, right? Kind of like we're a car and we give it to the mechanic and we say, fix it. And we don't take any responsibility for changing its oil or, you know, lubricating when it needs to. We're just like, I don't know what happened. I ran it into the ground. Now fix it. And then you get the car back. So that's kind of how we've been treating our bodies. So when we get back to the question of sort of personal wellness, I do think that what it should be centered around is actually re-education of, you make these choices. You are the one that knows your body best. And when you notice that something is off, recognize that it is off with a larger ecosystem. It's not just a one thing, but that's also part of the education. And I think having been, and I still am, sort of walking those lines in both worlds where, you know, I have these group experiences, but then I have one-on-one clients, I can see the benefits of both depending on where the person is in their life. I find that in group experiences, I started to become a little bit disgruntled, I guess, because I could see things slipping through the cracks. You know, it's like, oh, but this person needs more of this information, but you got to keep going because you got to teach to the middle. And so you're kind of leaving folks behind. And then the folks who kind of are already there are like a little bit bored. And so you're like, oh, you know, they're not sinking into the information. It's become very surface because the group is too large, right? But then with that one-on-one person, if you don't educate them enough or orient them enough to see how what they are doing and the choices that are making impact the larger ecosystem, or what that means for who they are and where they're seated, then that's also a disservice. So it's a tough one. Because I can see, you know, the good and the not so great in both. But I do, it's kind of like, I just end up hoping that those of us who are in positions to educate are actually steering our audiences toward that bigger picture, no matter what vehicle we're using, right? So if you've got 150 people on a Zoom call, I hope that the message that they're taking away is one of re-engagement with the larger landscape. And if you're working one-on-one, hour after hour, I hope that that is also the message.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Yeah. That really, yeah, feeling into that, and just the continued, like, the way we black and white everything in terms of the, like, without the nuance of, well, there's this in this situation and this person. And I guess I'm just, continuing to more and more notice in the larger course of things, like, for example, thinking about our guts and how, just having these bazillions of bacteria and living organisms within us, um, are so reflective on our, like, freshness and availability of food and the soil it's grown in. And, knowing that people with the most denuded guts in all of the world are folks living in cities in the US. And so just a sense of, it's not so much a reflection of the individual choices, but about these larger systems, large agricultural systems, and beyond.
Right.
And just, it feels hard to, it feels so big. It feels like there's such a chasm in terms of these other bigger things at work,
Mm-hmm.
and how to support people in that. But
It's interesting that you mentioned sort of the food systems, right? That I think one of the things I noticed during the course of the pandemic was, and I was so glad for it, a lot of people started growing their own food again, and they're like, I had one of my clients say to me, and I thought it was so cute. She was like, do you know that when you buy scallions and how they have those roots hanging off, if you cut that bottom off and you plant it, it'll grow another scallion? And she was just so surprised by this. And I was like, our disconnect from our food and where we come from is so very, where it comes from is so very, very real. And so I was just pleased with that uptick in people rediscovering how to grow food. And it doesn't just arrive in a plastic bag. There's there's a thing that must happen. But at the same time, I think we are so inundated, especially here in the US, with bad options,
mm,
that it's hard to actually choose well.
mhm.
And I think that is the hardest part, I think, of those of us in these roles where we're trying to support people in their choices, that there is so much that is not really healthy or good for our systems, that's out there, right? So we'll go back to the bread again because it's an easy example. I'll have a client who is like, oh, well, of course, fiber one is going to be good because, my doctor said I need to get more fiber, and clearly this is great. And so in one of my workshops that I used to lead, it was called Gutsy. I actually had a bag of fiber one, and it lasted for 6 months. And it only started to, it was like, I just kept it up on top of the, on top of our refrigerator just to see how long. I was very curious about the preservatives in it. And it finally started to kind of smell like beer, but it never actually really turned. It just started to smell like beer. And I thought, and I brought this bread to this class, to this workshop for months, and saying, it's still, it's still hanging in there. I was like, there shouldn't really be anything that we're putting into our bodies that's going to last that long. It's like putting paste or plaster or wood fibers or, into your body that's not getting processed out. Your body already has too much else to work on. Just, the pesticides free flowing in the air, much less the ones that are on the food you're eating. So when you're trying to make healthy choices in the face of the marketing that tells you this is going to be good for you, we're asking people to dig a little deeper, like literally. If you're going to buy prepackaged things, you're going to have to read the labels. And, if when you're reading those labels, if you're, say 4 or 5-year-old can't read the ingredients, then it's probably not necessarily going to be great for your body. And it probably wasn't necessarily processed in a way that was great for the environment. So, but that's a lot of educating. And there are a lot, I mean, when you walk into a grocery store, the seeming amount of choices, when really there's actually only one, but it's hard to find it. It's hard to find it. It's like, do you go with paper bags or recycled bags, or all of these things have an impact. And I think most people want to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing, but our commercialist capitalist society has inundated us with a lot of stuff, and so we just shut down and go with what's easy. It's right there, I'll just go with that. But
Right.
yeah, the digging deeper, that is
Mm-hmm.
the teaching. That is what we're trying to help people, again, remember a simpler approach to living, a simpler approach to food, a simpler approach to connecting to this earth and being a part of this system. You know, it feels harder on the surface because of what we're fed, but once you kind of see it, you go, oh, this actually is easier. But you have to get past all of the marketing first. It's a big ask. It's a big
It
task.
is. Yeah. And just the level of fatigue, I think.
Mhm.
Like I think oftentimes that sense of like, I'm just so tired. I'm just so overwhelmed. I'm just so full of kind of eco anguish. I don't even know what to do.
Yes.
So, that bit of paralyzation. I oftentimes think that it's so amazing to me how to just watch how each of us are doing it in our own completely different way. Like one person is like growing extra food in their garden for the food pantry, or one person is like, I can pick up the extra dog poop bags on my
Right.
walks that somebody left,
Exactly.
and I can, you know, like I am like a plastic free house. Like every person is doing it
Really.
in their own completely different way, and it's like,
Mhm.
and they're all good. Like it's all
Yeah.
like that little tiny, whatever you're drawn to, like whatever you're stumbling into that you're magnetized to,
Yeah.
it just is, it all matters,
It
I think.
does.
But
It
yeah.
absolutely all matters. And I think that I think most people are trying their best.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes I'll I go into the cesspool that is social media. Oh, but sometimes I float in there, and I know that people are coming from a good place. It's like, there'll be this whole argument about only eating soy, and then folks who don't eat soy are like, well, that they're, after all the cows are gone, they're clearing them out to plant the soy, and it's killing everything. And so it's sort of like, how do you choose, right? And so they're kind of going at each other about who's being better to the earth. And it's like, as long as you're trying in the
Mm,
ways that you can,
yeah.
let it go. Because the systems that we're working against are a little bit bigger than us. But choose what makes sense for your body and your family, and what's truly nurturing, and keep spreading the word in a healthy, happy way. um, and trust that everybody's trying. I think they
Yeah.
are. you
Yeah.
know it's
Yeah.
and it's yeah, it's just not an easy battle, so to go
Hmm.
easy on each other is the point.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, just you mentioned this before, sort of our tendency to sort of um, kind of like compartmentalize, really viewing the like this collective view of the borders and boundaries of our bodies, the way we sort of cut ourselves off, or kind of fragment ourselves. We are really good at separation, not so good at like kind of putting it all back together again.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I lately, what's really um, coming up for me is this sense of, instead of feeling into we think about our immune system, but instead, feeling into the sense of like a vast immune intelligence that incorporates, our lymphatic systems and our circulatory systems and our digestive systems and, everything kind of working together. First of all, honoring the great mystery and all of that and all that we don't understand. Thank goodness for that. And just this sense of like, we're always looking for one single voice instead of like the nuanced and complex coalescing of like all these voices coming together. So, just feeling into that and wondering if you had any other thoughts about that. And also just in terms of on an everyday basis, just kind of maybe tuning into, like to me, I feel like I'm often in a state of unlearning. Like I feel like I'm unlearning a lot. And what that has to do is I find myself thinking or speaking from an old lens. And then, so I'm curious, if you had any thoughts around that everyday piece too, like in terms of our viewpoint and our speech. And I know that was a long question, but hopefully there's something in there.
I'm like,
yeah. Trace it back.
Let's see. So about the everyday, our everyday dialogue. I think we have to remember that we are human. The earth and the spirits of the earth and the land and is a lot older than we are. And I think probably a lot more patient than we are. And so in our human way, right, I think it's falling back into something that we were taught before or something that we believe to be true is not necessarily something to be admonished. It's like, especially when you're recognizing it, it's like, oh, why would I have said that? Or why would I have gone there? All right, let's, each day is an opportunity to do it better rather than getting stuck in I fell off the horse again, right? It's like, if we think of the practice of yoga, we call it a practice because it's never done. We are literally always learning, right? And unlearning. And we have to be in the exact moment. And it's like when we fall out of that balance or out of that tree, it's like, okay, what's happening in my body? What am I learning? It's not oh, you're terrible. That's not where we want to land with it. That's not the lesson. So I think it's the same in our everyday lives, that I see these moments in these bodies as almost practice, as relearning and unlearning, and that's the way it's meant to be. Because one day, and sort of in the time frame of the earth, our lifetimes are quite short, and so we'll rejoin our ancestors, and hopefully when we rejoin, we are in a better place than we were when we came back into these bodies. So I think it's okay. I think it's okay to fall here again and pick yourself up and expect that you can forgive yourself and that others around you can forgive you for the fall. It's all good. That's my hope. I know it doesn't always happen that way, but that's my hope. I teach some of my students, we talk quite a bit about sort of the second dart that we throw at ourselves. So the first one is, that something happened. I'll use stubbing your toe as an example because it's easier. So you stub your toe and it hurts. And then, so that's the first dart. And your brain's like, ooh, that hurts. Let me, send some energy down there to start whatever healing process I need to do. The second dart is when you start berating yourself for being clumsy. How could I not see that? Oh, you're so dumb. And then you have that whole dialogue with yourself about what you did wrong. And then your brain has to deal with that. And it starts to live in your body. And then your cells start to go, ugh. And then, then you're coming to see me. because you have talked yourself into a place that, you could have avoided by simply going, yep, that hurt, and moved on, right? So the same is true. Somebody steps on your toe, your brain still has to do the work to send everything, the signals and all of that to, start the repair on your foot. But if they stepped on it, then you're yelling at them. How could you be so clumsy? We have to pause and go, you know what? I don't have to react to this stubbed toe. I'm going to let my body do what it needs to do, and I'm going to keep going. It's all good. And then we don't have that second dart. It's not one towards anybody outside of us. It's not towards ourselves. It's just in the past. Yeah. So that's how
I really have felt that more and more in terms of like energy expenditure over time. I'm like, you watch the pattern of exactly the second dart. And over time, I've just, more and more, I've noticed within myself this sense of like, wow, it's a lot of energy put forth to like do that whole second dart thing. Kind of sick of doing that, So
you put the energy towards something else. It's like reserve your energy for something better, something worthwhile,
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm curious just to, in kind of wrapping up, if there's any kind of like story or something that you're noticing around you lately, any particular sort of kin or more than human, family around you where just feeling joy from that, or, what's arising currently?
What's arising currently? I have always really enjoyed spring. Even though I'm a summer-born baby, the coming out and the bursting of all the dandelions, and it just brings me great joy. I'm looking at them outside my window. And I think when I sit in the lawn with our dandelions, which I know there are people out there who are horrified by that idea, it reminds me of like the resilience of this earth and of us as, humans and our connections. I'm like, it took me a while to retrain my husband to leave our dandelions and let them come up and feed the bees and all of that, because, he, just as I did, grew up in suburbs where you were supposed to mow the lawn and keep it perfectly green and put weed killer on everything. But now instead, I get to pick the dandelions and turn them into dandelion wine. And as I'm with them, I'm like, come on, bees, bring it on, and remind me that life is truly a gift and worth opening up to in all kinds of ways. Yeah. So I think the dandelions are probably my biggest conversation right now this season, at this point in the season. And hopefully there are more people out there who are letting them just grow wild. First food for our bees, and we kind of need that. It matters.
So true. We have a lot of the farmers here band together, and they just, fields of dandelions, this time of year. So it's very encouraging.
Yeah.
It's very encouraging to see all those yellow faces turned up to the sky. And
exactly. Exactly.
And
they're just, they're exceptionally, I don't know, this year, maybe it could just be me imagining it, but I just feel like they seem brighter, and their heads seem a little bit bigger. And I don't know if it's like having had a break or something for a while, but I'm glad to see them, and it gives me hope for everything.
Yeah. Well, is there any offerings in particular that you wanted to sort of highlight or tell us about? You have a lot of offerings, so I'm just curious if there's anything that you're putting, particular attention to at this time, or.
Yeah, actually, I am really focused quite a bit on my ancestral medicine offerings. I'll be anchoring actually an initiations in daily ritual course that's actually offered by one of my teachers, Dr. Daniel Four, and that starts in May. It's an online course and it's internationally available. And my part in it will actually not only to be holding sort of the smaller group sessions where we're able to connect with each other, but I'll be holding specifically BIPOC space for the entire year, so that there's somewhere for people to kind of land and digest the, you know, the practices and sort of explore how it's working, whether they feel rootless or completely anchored. But, you know, bringing these ritual practices and earth honoring practices in, you know, sort of taking them in a way, and then sending them back out authentically from themselves and their people is what we'll be working on. And so I'm really excited about it because it's the first time we're doing this for a year-long offering. And I just really think it's going to be a wonderful relearning opportunity for a lot of people. And also a way to connect in this, you know, we're still sort of navigating, I think, ways to connect post-pandemic, I guess we'll call it, or what, epidemic now stages. And I think having these small little groups in something in a larger container helps us feel heard, but also well held. And so I'm really looking forward to that. But outside of that, I am always available for one-on-one connections and support.
Beautiful. That sounds so exciting. I have looked at that offering and kind of like thinking about maybe joining. So yeah, it is a good one. I agree. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Erica, for just spending this time with me and just honoring, you know, your beauty and just the way you're spending your life's energy and, you know, just celebrating that. So
absolutely. Thank you for inviting me and reaching out and all of those wonderful things. I'm just truly, truly honored to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, much gratitude to everyone who's been listening and for spending this time with us and just being willing to struggle against the edges a little bit as we find new ways of relating and submerging ourselves in a great love affair with this wild earth. And I would love to hear your stories, written or spoken, ways that you're discovering emergent, creative, intimate connections with the places that you're living. So you can always go to the podcast page at kendraward.com to share your yarns and your poems and any revelations to the story cauldron. So oceans of love to you all, and saying goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.